When I arrived in Canada, of course, my first priority was to finish my medical studies, establish a practice, which I did. Eventually, I established quite a successful practice in the east of town, and I was very happy with that. But deep down, I wasn't, there was something there which was bothering me. I mean, I think all these years of concentration camp in ghetto and whatever was like a burden I was carrying inside. And one of my friends suggested I go into psychoanalysis, which I did. And that helped me a great deal. It wasn't enough, though. Also, at the same time, around 1963, I came into contact with a humanist group, Humanist Fellowship of Montreal. I became a member and eventually one of the presidents. A group of people who were atheists, agnostics, free thinkers, who tried to develop an ethic and a morality based on what we know about the nature of man, based on psychology and history and biology, whatever else, and to develop our own value system independent of the Bible or holy books and things like that. And this appealed to me. So eventually when I became president of the Humanist Fellowship of Montreal, I became a public figure in the sense I went on radio and television and saying what humanism is about and what I believe and things like that. Eventually, what happened was that the committee of the House of Commons in Ottawa debated the question of abortion. So as a medical doctor, I was interested in this. I studied the whole thing, and I persuaded the humanist groups in Canada to present a brief to the House of Commons debating that question, that abortion should be a right of women, at least up to 3 months in early pregnancies. And that had a tremendous echo across the country. The first time in the history of Canada that a responsible group of citizens proposing that abortion should not be in the criminal code, it should be a right of women, that women had the right to decent, safe medical abortions. That created an enormous stir and publicity, and I started receiving patients who would come to my clinic, look me up in the yellow pages and say, "Doctor, we know your views. I'm in trouble, I'm pregnant, I can't possibly do anything. I'm willing to commit suicide, willing to do anything. Can you help me?" And at first I would say, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm with you, but I'm married, I have 2 children. I could lose my medical practice and go to jail for the rest of my life." And eventually, after 2 or 3 months of that, I decided that, look, this law is based on religious dogma, which has nothing to do with the welfare of women. It denies them a service to which they're entitled. It condemns women to die unnecessarily. I'm going to do it. So I decided on civil disobedience, and next, after women started asking me again for that, I started performing abortions in my office. And eventually, I decided to do it with the best method available at the time, which was the vacuum suction technique, which I pioneered in Canada. And my abortion practice grew by leaps and bounds. More people started knowing, doctors started knowing, and eventually I decided to do it full time. At the time, it was highly illegal. The penalty was life imprisonment, possibly. And I realized I was taking an enormous risk, but I felt good about not just preaching this thing, but practicing what I believed in. So it was very stressful for me. On the one hand, I was risking my career and my future and my freedom and the security of my family. On the other hand, I was doing something which was of enormous importance to these women. I knew that basically I was saving their lives, saving their health, protecting their future fertility, protecting their dignity. And it was a stressful period, but very satisfying to me personally, that I, who could have been a piece of dust so many years ago, could do something of such great importance to people, in spite of the law, which I considered to be cruel and unjust and unfair. Eventually I was arrested. When I was jailed, I remembered my father had been jailed many times. In a sense, I was following in the footsteps of my father. And I was determined that I was going to fight this through.
What year was this?
I was arrested first time on June 1st, 1970. And eventually I was tried before a jury and I was acquitted. And in a sense, it sort of reaffirmed my faith in humanity. He was a French-Canadian jury, Catholic. I was a Jew, I was an atheist, I was an immigrant to Canada. I didn't swear on the Bible. And they acquitted me. They obviously believed me, and they believed that what I was doing was right. So that was a tremendous victory for women in Canada, for humankind. And to me, it was a reaffirmation of my faith in humanity, which I had not lost in spite of everything that had happened. What happened after that was that in spite of the acquittal, the higher court reversed, in Quebec, reversed the jury verdict that condemned me. And that's the first time in the history of Canada that happened. Eventually, I was convicted by that higher court to 18 months in prison. He went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they approved by a majority of 6-3 of the appeal court's decision. So that in spite of a jury acquittal, I was put into prison for 18 months. I was tried a second time and acquitted again by a jury, a French-Canadian Catholic jury in Montreal. So after 2 jury acquittals, I was still in jail. That created a stir among civil libertarians in Canada. The former Prime Minister Diefenbaker, who was a civil libertarian, introduced a bill into the House of Commons which said that higher courts should not be able to reverse a jury verdict of innocence. That bill eventually became law and became known as the Morgentaler Amendment to the Criminal Code. And eventually the Minister of Justice annulled the verdict of guilty and reordered a new trial. So I was tried a third time, I acquitted again, so after 3 juries, I was free man. Jury acquitted, I was a free man in Quebec.
What year was that?
That was in 1976. Then when the Parti Québécois government of René Lévesque came into power, they decided then that enough is enough, that it's not possible to have a jury conviction of a doctor providing safe medical abortions, and they decided that the law, the abortion law in Quebec, was not going to be enforced. At that point, I trained a number of doctors for the community health centers to train them to do abortions in the community health centers, and Quebec became the most accessible province to medical abortion at the time.
Since that time, what other provinces have you been active in?
What happened after that was that after a period of rest, I decided that what I had done for Quebec, I should do for other provinces as well, because in the other provinces, the conditions were pretty bad still. And that's my second phase of my campaign. I opened a clinic in Winnipeg, in Toronto. They were strictly still against the law. The law had not changed. And I was tried again in Toronto. I was acquitted by by a 4th jury in English Canada. This jury acquittal was reversed by another court of appeal. They could not put me to jail because of the Morgentaler Amendment to the Criminal Code. They ordered a new trial. We appealed that to the Supreme Court of Canada. And on January 28, 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada declared the law under which I had been tried 4 times to be invalid, in violation of the Charter of Rights in the Canadian Constitution. And since that time, we haven't had an abortion law in Canada. So there was a tremendous victory for women, for the welfare of women, and it has had reverberations across the country. And I was very proud of that.